Hello everyone, Richard here. Apologies for the indulgent introduction, but I just couldn't help myself. Today, as you might have already guessed, we are going to be looking at the Skitarii, the newest class added to Darktide. The Legiones Skitarii are the militant arm of the Adeptus Mechanicus, representing the martial forces available to the Dominion of Mars. From the radiation-soaked vanguard to the nimble ruststalkers and infiltrators, there are many soldiers in the legions of the Omnissiah. The class in-game represents a Skitaris Alpha Primus, or the rough equivalent to an Imperial Guard captain, leading a company-sized formation of Skitarii into battle. In Darktide, a Primus cohort has been requisitioned by Hadron to serve amongst Inquisitor Grendel's warband. They bring with them centuries of military experience, the respect of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and least of all, a host of advanced weaponry. The Skitarii compares well to the veteran in a sense of versatility and durability, having 150 health and 100 toughness by default. From a mobility perspective, they will have a similar feeling to the Zealot, having 3 base stamina and regenerating faster than most other classes, although by the time you get a filled out talent tree, they will probably have a feeling all their own. The Skitarii also brings with it an array of new weaponry, both ranged and melee, each one a unique option compared to the more conventional Imperial options. At level 1, the first primary weapon you have access to is the Arc Maul, a relatively balanced melee option that introduces the arc mechanic relatively early on into the class. If we take a look at its attack pattern while dealing with single targets, it's relatively intuitive. The crowd control combo is much less so. It will essentially start off with a single light attack, followed up by subsequent heavy attacks to keep up with cleaving. Normally, I think alternating between light and heavy is a better combo as it allows you to apply impact and knockback more frequently and keep the horde under control. Frankly, in most cases, the efficiency isn't that crucial, and I find myself just going to town with some vibe-based melee attacks in lieu of an elegant attack pattern with the Arc Maul. The special action for the Arc Maul charges the weapon and will allow subsequent attacks to not only inflict additional damage, but also electrocute them and potentially cause this to arc to other targets. Additionally, the push attack for the Arc Maul when charged up will push enemies back a considerable distance and deal a fair amount of damage, enough to kill wounded horde enemies. Some of the unique blessings for the Arc Maul include Voltgeist Overload, basically giving you a chance to insta-kill any human-sized enemy hit by your Arc Lightning. Also, the Voltaic Arcs blessing can increase the reach of your Arc Lightning, potentially pairing well with Voltgeist for a fun Arc build. More serious recommendations would probably include Execution for increased damage to staggered enemies, Confident Strike for toughness regeneration on chained hits, or Thunderous to help chew away at tougher enemies. As far as perks are concerned, the usual suspects of bonus damage against Unarmored, Flak, and Maniacs are all solid choices and will probably give you the most utility. In my experience, I haven't seen this weapon shine as a big game clubber, so Flak and Maniac are usually my go-to since I do have a special hatred for Ragers. Also unlocked at level 1 is the Galvanic Rifle, a Technopunk M1 Garand that fires Servitor-guided smart ammunition. The only real difference being the Galvanic Rifle is sadly not fed from end-block clips, so no ping when emptying the rifle. The Galvanic Rifle, as you'd expect, is an accurate and high-damage weapon, excellent if you are leaning into a Ranger type build. Also as expected, the Galvanic Rifle excels at picking off high priority targets, even those clad in Carapace armor. It can reliably one-shot kill most specialists with no major bonuses required. The only enemies that are going to regularly give you trouble are going to be Crushers, but that's just because they're a tough nut to crack in general. However, if you lean into a critical hit build, they can be a little bit more consistent to bring down. Against Gunners is where I think the Galvanic Rifle really shines, thanks to its one-shot kill potential and very clear iron sights. It does have an alternate attack, and it's not really anything to write about. You stick the enemy with the barrel of your gun, and it does a modest amount of damage and knocks most human-sized enemies back. It is useful in a pinch in close combat if you have somebody up in your face and you're out of ammo, but other than that, not very much use. For some recommended blessings, Headhunter allows you to reliably score critical hits around every 2 or 3 shots, and Opening Salvo is also a good pick, especially if you don't mag dump, basically giving you an additional 20 strength for every shot. If you do lean into crits, Deadly Accurate and Headhunting play well off each other, with Headhunting provide an additional 60% weak spot critical damage. For perks, bonus damage against Carapace, Maniac, and Flak Armored users were my preference since unarmored targets will almost never need more than a single weak spot or critical hit. The next unique weapon unlocked at level 6 is the Mechanicus Power Sword. As of its release, it remains a bit of a controversial melee option. While capable of dealing a lot of single target damage, its hitboxes for both strike down and cleave attacks are not very generous. Its single target combo was unintuitive initially from my perspective, at least when attempting to sustain damage over a prolonged combo. Executing it basically consists of repeating a pattern of heavy, light, light, and heavy. Although against anything less durable than a crusher, you will usually only need 2 or 3 weak spot hits to finish the job. Its horde clear combo is thankfully much easier. Alternating between light and heavy attacks will repeat sweeping vanguards after an initial single target jab. Its special ability, like other power weapons, is to perform a charge-up attack. Unlike the Veteran's Power Sword, however, it does not stay activated for a duration of time, but only for that specific attack move. It will follow the same pattern as your normal attacks, however with additional damage and cleave power being applied. You are limited to 6 charges, which will regenerate shortly after use. Usually you won't burn through these too quickly unless you're pressed into dealing with several Carapace enemies at once. Overall though, the Power Sword lends itself to quickly taking out single durable enemies as opposed to being a tool for dedicated horde clear, but you can hold your ground with it with a bit of practice. The second unique ranged weapon for the Skitarii, unlocked at level 7, is the Arc Rifle. It fires bolts of electrical energy that when striking their target can arc to other nearby enemies, similar to the Arc Maul. This enables the Arc Rifle to quickly attrit hordes at range and can help suppress groups of enemies, especially groups of Ragers or Gunners. The Arc Rifle is technically fully automatic but fires much slower than any autogun or recon lasgun. However, compared to other automatic weapons, it packs significantly more punch, able to take down most horde and roamer enemies with a single shot. Its arc ability and mostly generous ammo reserves means the Arc Rifle isn't terrible for horde clear, but is still accurate enough to drop specialists and elites at medium range. It will only feel inadequate against large groups of crushers since the Arc Rifle doesn't lose too much damage against most Carapace enemies. There's a lot of options that work well when it comes to selecting blessings for the Arc Rifle, and it will really depend on what you're planning on scoping it for. For horde clear, Charmed Reload paired with either enhanced voltaic arcs or Cavalcade are solid picks, with Charmed Reload allowing you to sustain continuous fire for longer. Against tougher targets, Cavalcade and Blaze Away are compelling since you will likely be holding down the trigger for at least a dozen or so shots. For perks, bonus damage against Carapace armor is not an unreasonable choice, and neither is bonus damage against elites or specialists. Otherwise, taking bonus damage versus Maniac or Flak armored enemies, as with most weapons, isn't a bad option. Its high base damage means that bonus damage against infested and unarmored is less of a utility, with the exception of hounds and tox bombers. The final unique ranged weapon for the Skitarii, the Phosphor Blast Pistol, is as powerful as it is quick on the draw. Essentially a flare gun with a revolving mechanism, it fires burning hot slugs of white phosphorus that mark and burn their targets from the inside out. While typically used by Skitarii to mark targets, here it is purely a weapon of chemical and kinetic power. It does have a similar feel to the Stub Revolver, however with the added feature of applying some burning damage to the target it strikes. This damage over time persists for about 20 seconds, at times inflicting an additional shot's worth of damage over that time span. Great for tougher enemies and bosses. The projectile also has a fair amount of ranged cleave, meaning it can pass through fodder, attempting to block your view of a more valuable target. While it does not deal as much raw damage as the Galvanic Rifle against most enemies, it does punch through Carapace armor a bit better, allowing it to keep pace. It is snappier to draw and holster compared to either the Galvanic Rifle and Arc Rifle, so it works well as a quick finisher for melee-focused builds as well. For recommended blessings, Surgical isn't a bad option if you remember to aim down sights and not sling flares from the hip, while Infernus capitalizes on the extra crits to inflict even more burning damage. For perks, not to sound like a broken record, but bonus damage against Flak armor, Maniacs, Elites, and Specialists are all good choices, but thanks to its extra punch through Carapace armor, bonus damage against Carapace enemies is also not terrible either. Finally, we have the Transonic Blades rounding out the unique weapons for the Skitarii and offering a balanced take-on-all-comers melee weapon. The description and function of transonic blades can vary based on the source, but the general idea is the blades vibrate at a varying frequency to match the adversary's armor's resonant frequency. This then allows the blades to destroy or run through the armor upon striking it, allowing the user to negate even the resilient armor of Chaos Space Marines. In-game, this is modeled by giving the blades two modes which are swapped by using the special action key. The default option gives you a combo of sweeping vanguard attacks, while the second option is more single target focused strike down and stab attacks. The flexibility makes it a good option for almost any configuration with the Skitarii, but doesn't hold up as well as the other, more specialized weapons in their niche. Still, they can cut through hordes very quickly, and have a larger dodge distance than the Power Sword in Arc Maul. Also, as a bonus, your agility is baked into the weapon by default, since it lacks a mobility stat unlike the other two Skitarii melee options. For perks and blessings, leaning into the all crit build is a common recommendation, taking Shred, Riposte, bonus critical damage, and bonus critical chance. Shred is great for both single target and crowd control situations since chain hits do not have to be the same target, however the combo does end if your swing fails to connect. With that configuration and the right talents, you can easily get your crit chance to above 35% sustained and above 50% on successful dodge. So now that we have discussed all the new toys available to the Skitarii, it's time we dive into the talent tree and highlight the unique auras, abilities, blitzes, and keystones to the class. Your base ability is a weaker version of Voltaic Emitter. Your base aura is a weaker version of Resurgence, even though it's called Resurgence by default. And your base blitz is a less aggressive version of the Artificer Servo Skull. It does go without saying that it is almost always worth picking up an enhanced version of these, although I feel like the only blitzes I find worth the additional investment are the Servo Skull and the Arc Grenades. Skitarii abilities and some of their talents revolve around using charges. These charges are gained passively or by achieving requirements from the 4 ability modifiers surrounding the center of your talent tree. Activating your ability will require at least 1 charge, although Voltaic Emitter can consume more than that. By default, you can also store 3 charges, but talents can increase this up to 5. Voltaic Emitter is a nice panic button and scales well with the additional charges that you can gain. It also is great for giving you breathing room if you are overwhelmed or getting pelted by nearby ranged enemies. I do find that it is a bit inconsistent, especially when engaging enemies at any sort of height differential, so make sure you're at the same Y level as them and free from any obstruction for best effect. Advanced Combat Doctrine functions as a pseudo aimbot, essentially allowing your shots to snap to enemies near your crosshair. Additional keystones for this ability can increase your cleave, crit, reload speed, fire rate, damage output, and make you more survivable, especially against ranged attacks. Even if you have good aim, this can still be very useful as it will allow you to quickly engage gunners entrenched in cover. It can feel inconsistent at times, and I have heard it is bugged with some keystones, but this is an issue I don't anticipate lasting more than a few patches. Cord Claw Strike is the final option for abilities for Skitarii. This gives you a quick melee attack that will deal high damage and always crit with 50% rending. Its additional keystones allows it to specialize into either single target or multi-target damage, and either allow it to reclaim some capacitance or stack damage with successive uses. Axial Slash, while appearing to be the more horde clear strike, still does high damage versus tougher enemies to the point that I find it to be the better option. Against crushers and monstrosities, the probing strike is likely going to be the better option, but the added utility of Axial Strike in my opinion makes it more compelling. As stated previously, the blitzes for the Skitarii break down to the Arc Grenades, Servo Skull, and Refraction Field, with the Servo Skull currently being the more popular options, at least from what I've observed in 50 or so Auric missions since the class released. The Servo Skull will sporadically engage enemies, dealing modest damage and applying some burn. Additionally, it can be ordered to complete data cogitator puzzles by pinging the device. You can also add a Metacase Servo Skull to revive, untie, and unnet teammates by tapping the Blitz key on them. Bear in mind that you do need to be within about 15 meters and have a clear line of sight to your teammate. On top of reviving them, it also gives them a huge toughness damage reduction and regeneration of 20% toughness per second for 5 seconds, which can make a huge difference if they're caught in a horde of enemies when they went down. You can also get a Purgator Skull, which is equipped with a small flamethrower capable of providing point defense or spinning around spitting flames in a circle. The Medicae and Purgator Skull share 4 charges and can be restored from grenade boxes just like the rest of the Skitari's blitzes. The Refraction Emitter, basically a personal refractor field, blocks all range damage for 8 seconds, although this can be extended to 12 seconds. Additionally, it will spit out arcs of lightning depending on how much damage was absorbed by the shield. You can also cap the amount of single health damage lost from an attack to 50. This is useful for tanking a Crusher or Mauler overhead, but not much else. Finally, the arc grenades are dedicated anti-high value target throwables, and by default you will have 3 of them, but this can be increased to 5. You can additionally make them cause ranged enemies' weapons to malfunction from the blast, or apply brittleness to enemy armor, making them more vulnerable to attack. Overall, I feel like the blitzes are sort of a mixed bag, with the Servo Skull being by far my personal favorite. Not having to mess with data cogitators after placing them alone makes missions like Hab Draco or Rolling Steel much easier. The Medicae additionally has clutched many games for me where I simply did not have the space to keep a horde at bay and revive a teammate. The arc grenades seem like a good second choice as they are very powerful, and especially so if you land them among a group of specials or elites. The refractor field, while not being useless, feels much more situational, although I will say I have appreciated it when dealing with gunner packs. I would keep in mind that I am often queuing in quick play with 1, maybe 2 friends, so running with a full team of players with mics and Discord may allow for some more flexibility here. The auras are thankfully pretty simple and straightforward. All of them will give you 25 extra toughness, with an additional bonus as well. Resurgence allows you and any ally in coherency to still regen toughness at 50% coherency even with enemies in close proximity. Ammunition deposits grants you and your allies in coherency 10% additional reserve ammo, and foe render gives you 15% cleave and 7.5% rending. I haven't really been able to observe or test the effect of resurgence, but my hypothesis is that most of your regeneration from close combat comes from killing horde enemies, so the effect is probably moot. The other 2 auras are obviously very valuable, and it will really just depend on which aura is easier for you to pick up and fits more thematically with your build. The last major component in the talent tree is your keystone talents, which consist of cleansing protocols, redline capacitors, and power overload. All of these will, broadly speaking, increase your durability and damage output, but the nuance comes from how each keystone is triggered and some of their secondary effects from keystone modifiers. Redline capacitors focuses on gaining and spending your charges and logically pairs well with the Cord Claw Strike and Voltaic Emitter to a lesser extent. This keystone tree can also increase your overall capacity up to 5, and boost your rending and damage output based on how many stacks you have. Cleansing Protocols focuses on stacking by killing elites, specialists, and avoiding damage. These stacks are persistent compared to redline and can even boost critical hit in melee attack speed. Finally, Power Overload synergizes well with consistently killing enemies with you and your allies nearby, and if you take Static Capacitor Drain, not dying repeatedly. Not only does Power Overload buff you, but your teammates in coherency as well, making it a great option if you enjoy being a team player. Jokes aside, unlike the Blitz options, all the keystones apply some very strong bonuses, and choosing which one to pick really comes down to understanding your own playstyle. Now that we understand some of the unique aspects of the Skitarii, I will quickly go over a few builds that are a good balance of style and flexibility. If you want to view these builds in full detail, along with some additional community builds, they will be posted in the video's description. Our first build, dubbed the Skitarii Ranger, focuses on eliminating enemies at a distance while still being able to do crowd control if they draw near. Our primary weapon will be the Arc Maul, with ideally our lowest stat being mobility, with penetration being an acceptable second choice. For blessing options, enhanced voltaic arcs and hammer blow, plus for perks, bonus damage versus maniacs and flak armored enemies are my recommendations. This combination will allow you to quickly attrit weaker enemies while keeping tougher opposition unable to pin you down in close combat. Our secondary weapon is the Galvanic Rifle, giving us plenty of range stopping power and letting us pick out high value targets from afar. For perks, bonus damage options are flexible, but I chose against maniacs and elites for maximizing coverage, although flak and carapace armor bonus would also work as well. For blessings, opening salvo is always a good pick for any single shot weapon. This paired with Headhunter really rewards well-aimed shots for stacking high damage and high crit chances. Next, I'd recommend at least 2 toughness curios, although a third can bring you to just over 200 toughness. Amongst the curio perks, I'd recommend 3 toughness buffs, 3 combat ability regens, and 2 gunner resistances with the final slot up to you, Stamina regeneration is always useful, however. For the talent tree, some of the key highlights include Servo Skull with Medicae for our Blitz, Advanced Combat Doctrines for our ability, Ammunition Deposit for our aura, and Flensing Protocol for our Keystone. These talents also lean into generating critical hits with Servo Sinew Surge, Last Stand Relay, and Piercing Sight, all granting large bonuses to critical hit chance. For charge generation, I selected Flux Conduit Buildup and Reactor Coil Recharge since we will hopefully both be hitting lots of weak points and scoring lots of crits, but removing one in favor of another talent is perfectly fine. Our next build, dubbed Skitarii Alpha, focuses on playing a support role to the strike team while still being able to deal with high value targets in sort of a duelist fashion. In Imperial service, power weapons are a status symbol for those in roles of military leadership. As such, this build will be using the Mechanicus Power Sword as its primary. As with our secondary weapon, the lowest stat ideally should be mobility, as it provides very little additional utility, going from 60 to 80%. For perks, bonus damage against Flak, Carapace, or Maniac enemies are my recommendations. Moving on to blessings, Decapitator and Superiority fit well thematically, and let the Power Sword shine at dealing with high threat enemies in close combat. Like any good leader in the 41st millennium, our ranged weapon of choice should be a sidearm, and for the Skitarii Alpha, accept nothing less than the Phosphor Blast Pistol. For perks, I'd recommend additional damage against Carapace, Flak, or Maniac enemies. Alternatively, bonus critical chance will fit nicely with our blessings. The first of which will be Infernus, dealing additional burn damage stacks upon critical hits, further increasing the pistol's already exceptional damage over time. Next, either Crucian Roulette or Surgical to boost critical hit chance. I am partial to Crucian Roulette since I defer to hipfire more than aiming my blast pistol, but the choice really comes on how you intend on using it. Curio will basically be a recurring theme, with 2 to 3 toughness curios, 2 to 3 gunner resistances, 2 toughness bonuses, and at least 2 ability regeneration perks. Some key talent highlights will include, once again, using the Servo Skull with Medicae for our Blitz, Voltaic Emitter for our ability, Foe Render Creed for our aura, and Power Overload for our Keystone. I chose to use Capacitor Reclamation Loop for our capacitance generation, but you can basically pick any of them with how this build is configured. I chose to forego the faster revive speed from Salvation Doctrine since we already have the Medicae Servo Skull, but it's not a bad option if you find some of the talents I've chose to be a bit indulgent. Power Overload makes the most sense for a support role, just make sure to keep everyone within a couple arm's length and you should reap the benefits of the continuous slaughter. Your playstyle should be focused on survival and watching your teammates back using both Blade and Bolt to keep the Disablers and Zoners at bay. While we lack the proper cosmetics and Stub Carbine to truly make a proper Skitarian build, the Transonic Blades and Cord Claw Strike make it close enough to have fun with. Skitarian Princeps are the officers that lead squads of infiltrators or ruststalkers, known for both their dizzying agility and melee prowess. Fittingly, our primary weapon will be the paired Transonic Blades, giving you high agility and flexibility to engage both armored targets and hordes alike. Our perks and blessings will thus focus on delivering powerful critical hits as reliably as possible, first by increasing our base critical hit chance, and critical hit damage via perks. For blessings, Repost and Shred offer a lot of opportunities to increase your crit rate since you will hit often, and since you can dodge frequently and at a greater distance than other melee options. The thematic choice for a Sicarian should be the Shredder Auto Pistol for a secondary, but since I want to use all of our unique weapons, the Arc Rifle will be our secondary choice. Since we are already sort of leaning into a critical hit build, we will be boosting our critical hit chance with the Arc Rifle via perks as well as increasing damage against Maniac enemies, although this can be substituted if desired. For blessings, I'm going to suggest Enhanced Voltaic Arcs and Cavalcade since higher crit chances and increased arc spread means more chances to critically hit. For our Curio, I'd still recommend the same basic configuration, although an extra stamina Curio instead of a third toughness or health can let you stay engaged in a melee for longer. For talents, it's probably not a huge surprise that we are once again going to be using the Servo Skull for our Blitz, Cord Claw for our ability, Foe Render for our aura, and Redline Capacitors for our Keystone. For our ability modifiers, I would recommend basically any of them except for generating 1% charge per second, as it is by far the weakest. If you are looking to spam the Cord Claw attack, taking Satiated Steel over Slice and Dice will mean your capacitance should recover quickly at the expense of stacking less damage. I did take Gunsmith because reloading the arc rifle does take a considerable amount of time, but it is a luxury pick and it may be worth foregoing for galvanized coating or advanced power management. Your playstyle with this will be highly dependent on acquiring and spending charges, as this is how you'll gain redline stacks. Thankfully, there is sort of a feedback loop when using Cord Claw. Spending a charge, but also increasing capacitance gain due to it automatically inflicting critical hits. This build requires you to sustain aggression and be comfortable performing on the front line. The Skitarii is a flexible class that, thanks in part to its very open talent tree, has a lot of options when customizing its builds. Regardless of what niche is missing from a strike team, the Skitarii can almost certainly fill the void. However, this comes at the cost of the Skitarii's skills, weapons, and overall playstyle being unforgiving at times. Both the Power Sword and Galvanic Rifle being prime examples, needing high degrees of precision to make full use. Additionally, some of its standout talents such as Refraction Field and Advanced Combat Directive are mediocre compared to the other options on hand. Overall though, the Skitarii is a welcome addition to Grendel's Inquisitorial Warband, and most of the glaring issues with the class will likely be ironed out or better understood as the meta matures. Thank you all for watching. Feel free to post any builds or tips in the comments section below. I had to gloss over some finer points to prevent this script from going past the 20-page count. Join me next time when we take a look at another class in Darktide, but until then, happy hunting.